Okay. You can go to the next slide, Penny. Okay. So I think that Rosalie and Meg gave like a really good basis in like the understanding of interoception and how we can help some of our learners with emotional regulation. So I'm going to really quickly talk about a really common way that this is addressed in our field, but also in a lot of other fields in psychology and education, things like that. So a lot of the time we do something called zones of regulation or something similar to that. It's not always specifically that, but something along those lines. And that's kind of a visual of what that might look like. So we're talking, different colors associating with different emotions and, having the child identify like what color they're in or the person. So in and of itself, there's nothing per se wrong with that, but how it's usually used is to identify the good versus bad emotions. So pretty much like everything but green is bad, usually, according to how this is implemented. And the focus is usually around, if I'm in blue or yellow or red, how do I get back to green? And green being like the only acceptable place to be. And so this has a lot of issues because we don't want anyone to learn that any of their emotions are bad, right? All of, if you're sad, if you're tired, if you're frustrated or worried or mad, like there's a reason. And telling you that this is bad and you need to get back to happy and calm, right? That's not helpful, and it's not being supportive of our learners. Like I think it was Meg who said, like, if I'm mad at you or something and you're like, all right, well, I need you to get back to happy. I'm like, I'm not happy, I'm mad, and there's a like valid reason for that, and you can help me address the reason that I'm mad and I might get back to happy, but until then I'm going to be mad. And our learners should have the same rights to do that we do as adults. And also another issue I think that happens with zones of regulation and things like it is it doesn't give them any strategies for how to get back to green. Like even if we are identifying that we're blue or yellow or red, like it doesn't provide any tools for helping you move away from that, even if that was the goal. So I'm gonna go into a few things that I have found that I like better. Okay, so the next couple of slides are all going to be resources that I pulled from Autism Level Up. If you guys aren't familiar with them, they're amazing, and I highly suggest that you check them out. It's a couple of people, an autistic person and an OT, I think she is, who work together to kind of put out these materials that are really reflective of autistic people's experience. So this is one of their worksheets, which is talking about powering up or powering down emotions. So as we've kind of said now, like emotions always have a place. And they have a context in which they're appropriate, but a lot of the time it's the intensity of the emotion that's the problem. It's not necessarily that it's a problem that I am happy and running around and excited, but maybe the intensity of that isn't appropriate for the setting or activity that I'm trying to participate in right now. So this has the same sort of visuals in terms of got different colors and different emotions and things like that. But it's not talking about any of those being bad or what I need to get to. It's talking about for the context that I'm in, where do I need to be? And so if I need to power up my emotion, I can do things like run or jump or swing, you know, so if maybe I'm tired or sad, these are things that I can do to, you know, power up a little bit. Or if I need to power down, you know, and these are examples. This is an example one that they filled out, but they have blank ones that you can fill in for your individual learners for the strategies that work for them, because as Meg was saying, not every, you know, no one's going to have the same strategies that work for them as everybody else. So I thought that this was a really cool visual and a different way to think about it in terms of how we can address things. Next slide. Okay, so these are a couple of other things also from Autism Level Up. And so these really relate to the idea that as we're talking about interoception and things like that, and being aware of your feelings, first of all, a lot of autistic people and different neurotypes really have difficulty with interoception. You know, so they physically and neurologically, those messages from their brain and their body aren't, you know, necessarily coming through the way that they're supposed to, and so they may not really have the ability to feel those signals the way that you typically would. And this comes up in a lot of different ways. You know, some of the difficulty that some of our learners have with toilet training, for example. Meg was talking about, you know, the part of interoception being feeling if your bladder is full and things like that. And so some of our learners may actually just not have that ability. So things like that. But so we, there's a couple of different ways that we can address this. So one of the things, one of the tools that Autism Level Up has is called All the Feels, which I love. And so you can kind of see a little bit in the picture there. So what they did is they talked to a lot of different autistic people about the ways that they experience emotions and different feelings in their body. But rather than using words, which a lot of the time is subjective, and or if you have a learner who, you know, has difficulty with you know, language and things like that, either expressive or receptive. What they did is they put them into pictures, like cartoon comic book type graphics, and you can see a couple of them there. So you can see like bam, bzz, pop, right? And so none of them are specific to any, like they don't give you any context. They don't say like bam is angry or, you know, whatever it might be. They just have this booklet of different pictures that can be associated with different sensations that you might be experiencing. And they let the learner, along with a partner, usually help figure out, like for them, you know, which of these pictures really looks like what your body feels like right now. And then with the help of a partner, they can help associate those things with feelings. Because if they're saying, you know, pointing to pop, my body feels like this right now, then their communicative partner might be able to say like, okay, well, looking at the context clues here, you tend to tell me that you're feeling pop, you know, when this and this and this is happening. So I think we can probably say when you're feeling pop, you're feeling excited or whatever it might be, right? But it's going to be different for every learner. But so this is a really cool tool that you can use because, you know, telling somebody, you know, oh, well, you're feeling nervous or something might not mean anything to them, or they might not know how to tell you. They might not know what that feels like or means. And it might feel different to them, you know, like when I'm nervous, I might get, you know, have my heart racing and sweaty palms, but someone might experience that differently. And then so similar, oh, no. And similarly, there's another tool on the side here that can help us also identify these things for our learners, or help us identify them. And again, this is an example of one that's filled out, but it can be individualized to every learner. So it talks about like, this is my energy right now. This is where I am. So like, for example, I'm amped up and fidgety, and I really love that it gives these examples of like, this is often seen as hyper, but it often feels like expanding energy, right? Like, and so you might be able to use that, like that might feel like pop or something to somebody, but you know, so what does that feel like in a way that is talking more about the physical sensation than using feeling words? And then also where this fits. So like amped up and fidgety isn't a bad thing, right? It depends on the context. This is a really good thing if you're like in PE or at a celebration or something like that, right? This is an appropriate place for your energy to be in those places. And then it gives you the outward indicators of that. So that might look like chatty, constant movement, fidgety, squeals, flaps, jumps, runs. And then what I feel like or experience might be like energy building, hard to sit still, need to move. It might be harder to express myself and access language, need physical space, right? And so this is also cool because a lot of the time autistic people will point out that the way that they express emotions outwardly doesn't necessarily match what we would typically expect. So for example, one of the two people in chart, you know, who create these resources was saying that, you know, when she's smiling, it's her response to being overwhelmed by something in her environment, or focusing really hard on something in her environment. And oftentimes when she's happy and engaged with something, she's not smiling. But so we might look at smiling as being like, oh, she's happy, and it might be more actually telling us that she's overwhelmed. And so I really like that this helps orient everybody to like, what do these things look like and feel like for this learner? And then how can we help them identify and move between those states? And how can we, you know, help identify like, this is where this is appropriate, and where this is going to be beneficial to me versus where it might be hindering me in what I'm trying to do. Next slide. Oh, that's backwards. There we go. Or I put it in twice, I'm not sure. Okay, so Meg introduced us to Mona Delahook, so she's another really awesome person to look into. If you haven't yet, she's got a couple of books out now. But generally speaking, what she does is she takes a neurological view of behavior and really looking into that brain-body connection. And so this iceberg visual that she has here shows us, like, you know, the tip of the iceberg. What we can see poking out, you know, is generally what we see from the child or even the environment. So we see attention-seeking behavior, misbehaving, oppositional, defiant. All of these are labels that we give to the behaviors that we're seeing, right? Based on the environment and things like that. So these are all the things that we can see. And so what we're not seeing under the surface there is all of these things that are happening internally, and a lot of that interoception that Meg was talking about, but also our neurology. So our physiological states, our neuroception, our stress responses, emotional responses, adaptations to sensory motor processing or preferences, pain or discomfort, thoughts and ideas, right? All of these things are happening internally that we can't necessarily see or access, but they affect the behavior. And oftentimes are kind of that link that Rosalie was talking about between this idea of our inner experiences being mentalistic, but there's a neurological basis for all of that. Everything that we do and experience inside of ourselves is a result of our brain and all the pathways and neurological pathways in our body. And so, you know, none of it is just this like disembodied thing that happens in our body, like a little like ghost or something, or the little like angels or devils on your shoulder, right? Like it's all to do with how your brain and your body are interacting. And so the other thing that Mona talks about is top-down versus bottom-up control. And so the idea being that there are some behaviors that we see that are the result of somebody sort of intentionally making a choice to engage in an action, and that comes from usually those higher levels of emotional and social development in terms of like connection with other people. Mona has a really cool couple of visuals on this in terms of like if you were building a house, the different stages of like emotional social development, and how, yeah, Meg's holding it up if you can see her picture there. I wasn't sure if like per copyright rules I was allowed to put it in here, so I didn't, but but you should definitely check it out. And so the idea being, I don't know that we're not allowed to, I just wasn't sure, so I figured I wouldn't. But also, so you know, if you're building a house, you have the foundation and you have the walls, and then you have the rooms, and then you have the electrical wiring, and then you have the decorations, and each of those things as you build needs those other things to come first in order to work. And the idea is that we move through those different levels, and I may be only at the room level sometimes if there's too much going on and I don't, you know, can't process everything that's going on. I might usually have the ability to be like connecting and building connections with other people, but the environment can impact where I am with that. But also, if I've never experienced really, you know, that co-regulation and things like that, that Meg and Rosalie were talking about, then I may not have the foundation that I need to do those other things. And so those earlier levels of social emotional development are what she refers to and what neurology refers to as like bottom-up control, meaning that they're coming from a place that's purely kind of neurological, instinctual, sort of like the way that younger children, infants sort of react to things, which is, you know, based on just the needs that they have at that point, and not necessarily a top down, which is like an intentional choice, but some almost like a more reflexive reaction. And a lot of the time what we see with meltdowns and things like that is really coming from a place of that bottom up control, because there are more basic needs that aren't being met. And we look at it as top-down control. We assume that this is a choice that they're making. And so being aware that those are usually coming from a place of bottom-up control means that we're able to better identify what needs aren't being met and make sure that we can help them regulate. Next slide. You can do next slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So this is something that Mona talks about in her book, but it's not actually necessarily hers that she created. It's based on the Polyvagal Theory, and it's pathways of the autonomic nervous system. And so basically, there are different pathways that have like neurologically been identified in our brains. And I don't pretend to know enough about like neuroscience to be able to like really adequately explain those, but Mona does a really good job of it in her book. You should get it. But the idea being, essentially it boils down to those like fight or flight responses that, you know, everyone kind of knows about that and has heard about that, but we don't often apply it to our everyday life or to our learners. And so basically there are different pathways that our brain has. And so when we are on the ventral vagal pathway, that's when we are kind of like calm, it's HRE, right? But like calm, content, relax. And this is the pathway that our brain needs to be on in order for connection and learning and things like that to happen. So as we as our body starts to get more arousal, so from different stimuli that might be occurring in our environment or things that might be occurring internally, we might move into the sympathetic pathway, that middle one there, and we usually put the different colors to them to help, you know, with the visuals. So green being, you know, green being go, that's your, we're good to learn and connect. And so red being, we're moving into this fight or flight response. So I'm either moving away or moving toward things that are upsetting or aversive or causing that arousal. So flight being movement away, so I'm running away from it, that's panic and anxiety and fear, and fight being moving toward the thing that is causing the arousal, so that would be rage, anger, frustration, things like that. And then past that we move into the dorsal vagal pathway, which we categorize as the blue pathway, and that's the freeze. So a lot of time you hear about like fight or flight response, but past that we also have the freeze response, which is not talked about as much and not something we look for as much, because it's pretty easy usually to see when somebody's in fight or flight, right? We might not characterize it that way, but it's usually pretty obvious what that looks like. Meg has showing all of our lovely resources here. But freeze is where basically our body shuts down, and it's an instinctive thing, that an adaptive thing that is built into our neurology to protect us from danger. So if it's not something that I can run away from or that I can fight, then I'm just going to shut down and try to protect myself as best I can. And so that's going to look like dissociation and numbness and depression and helplessness and being trapped. And a lot of the time we mistake being calm and passive for being in that green pathway, when a lot of the time it's actually in that blue pathway. And so where I find this to be really helpful in addressing emotional regulation with our learners is that by understanding this, we can learn to look for what each of these pathways look like for our learners. So again, it's going to look different for everybody. So like, what does it look like for this learner when they are in that green pathway? What does red look like? And what does blue look like? And then based on that, what are the needs that need to be met in order to get them back to green? Because you know, we talk about, obviously there's no emotion is good or bad, but when we're getting into these fight or flight responses and these freeze responses, that is our bodies responding to danger. And those are not states that we want to stay in because they are stressful to our body and can cause damage in the long run, especially when you're talking about trauma and things like that. That's people who have spent an inordinate amount of time in these red and blue pathways and have damage, you know, neurologically and from a mental health perspective from being in those. So we need to we do want to help our learners get back to green, which isn't to say necessarily that they're happy, but they are calm and they are back to being regulated. And so this is, again, just something that you can help identify in each of your learners, like what do each of these pathways look like? And then how do I help them? What helps them, you know, when they are in those? I think that's